The First National Bank of Manhattan was gleaming on the morning of October 15th, 1953. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, brass fixtures that caught the autumn sunlight streaming through tall windows, and the quiet hum of serious money being seriously managed. This was the kind of bank where presidents kept accounts, where Wall Street executives made their deposits, where everything was done with precision and propriety. At 9:47 a.m., a young woman named Margaret Sullivan walked through the heavy oak doors. She was 23 years old, dressed in her Sunday best, a pale blue dress her mother had pressed that morning, white gloves, and shoes she polished herself the night before. In her carefully organized handbag, she carried 3 months' worth of paychecks from a bakery where she worked, her birth certificate, her Social Security card, and a letter of employment verification from Mr. Castellano, the bakery owner. Margaret had Down syndrome, and she was about to open her very first savings account. She'd been planning this moment for months, ever since Mr. Castellano had promoted her from helping the back to working the register 3 days a week. The customers loved her. She remembered their orders, greeted them with genuine warmth, and handled the money with meticulous care. Mr. Castellano had told her she was one of his most reliable employees. And now, with 3 months of paychecks saved, $127.50 in total, Margaret was ready to take the step her mother had been encouraging her toward: financial independence. Her mother, Dorothy Sullivan, had wanted to come with her, but Margaret had insisted on doing this alone. "I'm a working woman now, Mama," she'd said that morning over breakfast. Working women go to the bank by themselves. Dorothy had smiled, pride and worry mixing in her eyes. "You're right, sweetheart. You are a working woman. But if anyone gives you trouble, they won't," Margaret had said with confidence that came from 3 months of successfully managing a cash register. "I have all my papers. I know exactly what to say. You taught me." So Dorothy had kissed her daughter's forehead, straightened her collar, and watched from the apartment window as Margaret walked toward the bank 6 blocks away, her handbag clutched firmly, her steps purposeful. Margaret approached the counter with the quiet confidence of someone who had practiced this moment 100 times. She'd rehearsed her lines, organized her documents, prepared for every question. She was ready. The teller who greeted her was a man named Robert Hendricks, 42 years old, 20 years with the bank, and possessed of the kind of institutional arrogance that comes from working in marble halls. He looked up from his ledger as Margaret approached, and his expression changed immediately, a subtle shift from professional courtesy to something colder. "Can I help you?" His tone was clipped, impatient. "Yes, please," Margaret said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "I would like to open a savings account. I have my identification and my deposits." She carefully placed her documents on the counter, exactly as she practiced. Robert glanced at the papers, then back at Margaret, his eyes lingering on the features that identified her condition. "A savings account," he repeated, his tone making it sound like she'd asked for something impossible. "Yes, sir. I work at Castellano's Bakery on Mulberry Street. I've been saving my paychecks for 3 months, and I'd like to open an account." Margaret spoke clearly, the way her mother had taught her, making eye contact, being polite but firm. Robert picked up the employment letter, barely reading it. "And you work there doing what exactly?" "I work the register on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I also help with packaging and cleaning. Mr. Castellano says I'm very reliable." Pride crept into Margaret's voice. "I see." Robert set down the letter and looked over Margaret's shoulder at the growing line behind her. "Listen, miss, opening a bank account is a complex process. There are legal documents, signature requirements, financial responsibilities. Perhaps you should come back with your parents or a legal guardian who can—" "I don't need a guardian," Margaret interrupted, her voice still polite but firmer now. "I'm 23 years old. I work. I pay taxes. And I have all the required documents." She pushed the papers forward slightly. "My birth certificate, my Social Security card, my employment verification, and my deposits. Everything you need is right here." The people in line behind her were starting to pay attention now. A few whispered to each other. Robert's face reddened slightly, whether from embarrassment or irritation wasn't clear. "It's not about the documents," Robert said, lowering his voice in a way that somehow made it worse. It's about capacity. Financial capacity. The ability to understand and manage an account. The bank has a responsibility to ensure that account holders can... I can count money, Margaret said, her voice quieter now but determined. I do it every day at work. I've never made a mistake with the register. Not once in 3 months. Mr. Castellano trusts me with his business. Why won't you trust me with my own money? Robert glanced at his colleague at the next window, a woman named Patricia Moore, who had stopped her own transaction to watch. He seemed to be looking for support, for confirmation that he was handling this correctly. Perhaps, Patricia interjected, walking over, we should have Mr. Whitmore handle this. She smiled at Margaret, but it was the kind of smile you'd give confused child. Our manager can better explain the requirements. I understand the requirements, Margaret said, frustration creeping into her voice now. You need identification. I have it. You need proof of employment. I have it. You need an initial deposit. I have it. What else do you need? But Patricia had already turned away, heading toward the manager's office. Robert gestured vaguely toward a bench along the wall. If you could just wait over there, miss. Mr. Whitmore will be with you shortly. Margaret stood there for a moment, her carefully organized documents still on the counter. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the bank on her. The confident working woman who had walked in 15 minutes ago was starting to crumble. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered her papers. She walked to the bench and sat down, her blue dress looking suddenly less crisp, her polished shoes less shiny under the harsh fluorescent lights. She clutched her handbag in her lap and tried not to cry. She would not cry. She was a working woman, and working women didn't cry in banks. But the humiliation was settling in. The way Robert had looked at her, the patronizing tone, the assumption that she couldn't possibly understand something as complex as a savings account, the way Patricia had smiled at her like she was a child playing dress-up, the whispers from the other customers. Margaret checked her watch. 10:05 a.m. She'd been here for 18 minutes, and she still didn't have an account. Maybe her mother had been right. Maybe she should have come with her. Maybe. That's when Dean Martin walked in. Part 2, When Cool Met Cruel. Dean Martin wasn't supposed to be at the First National Bank of Manhattan that morning. He was in New York for a recording session, staying at the Waldorf Astoria, and his usual bank was on the West Coast. But he'd received a royalty check that needed depositing, and his manager had arranged for him to use this particular branch because of his discretion with celebrity clients. Dean walked in at 10:06 a.m., dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his signature confidence evident in every step. He wasn't performing right now. Wasn't on. He was just a man handling his banking, looking forward to getting to the studio by noon. But Dean Martin had a particular quality that went beyond his stage presence. He noticed people, really noticed them. It was what made him such a good performer. He could read a room, sense the mood, pick up on the subtle current of emotion that most people missed. And the moment he walked into that bank, he noticed Margaret. She was sitting on a bench along the wall, clutching a handbag, her shoulders slightly hunched. Her face showed the careful neutrality of someone trying very hard not to show emotion. Dean had seen that expression before, in different contexts, on different faces. It was the look of someone swallowing humiliation. Dean approached the counter, where Robert was now dealing with another customer. He waited his turn, but his eyes kept drifting back to Margaret on the bench. Something was wrong here. He could feel it. A bank employee named James approached Dean with a deference reserved for important clients. Mr. Martin, what a pleasure to have you with us today. Mr. Whitmore is just finishing up with another matter, and then he'll be happy to handle your transaction personally. Thanks, Dean said absently. He gestured toward Margaret. How long has that young lady been waiting? James glanced over. Oh, that's... Well, there's a bit of situation there. Nothing for you to worry about. Can I get you some coffee while you wait? What kind of situation? Dean's voice was casual, but there was an edge to it. James lowered his voice. She wants to open an account, but, well, you can see she has special needs. We're trying to explain that she needs to have someone with her who can... Who can what? Dean interrupted, his voice still calm but colder now. Well, who can ensure she understands the financial responsibilities, the legal implications? We have a duty to protect vulnerable people from making decisions they might not fully comprehend. Dean looked at James for a long moment. Then he looked back at Margaret, who was now staring at her lap, her shoulders trembling slightly. "Excuse me for a minute," Dean said. He walked over to where Margaret was sitting. She looked up as a shadow fell across her, her eyes widening slightly when she recognized him. Even in her distress, even with everything going on, she knew who he was. Everyone knew Dean Martin. "Hi there," Dean said, his voice gentle. "I'm Dean. Mind if I sit down?" Margaret nodded, scooting over slightly on the bench to make room. Dean sat, noting the papers clutched in her hands. "Looks like you're having some trouble here today." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "I just want to open a savings account. I have all my papers. I have my money, but they won't help me." Her voice broke slightly. "They think I'm too stupid to have a bank account." "They said that." Dean's voice remained calm, but something hardened in his expression. "They didn't use that word," Margaret said quietly, "but that's what they mean. They keep talking about capacity and understanding and responsibility. But I understand. I work at a bakery. I handle money every single day. I've never made a mistake. Not once." Dean held out his hand. "May I see your documents?" Margaret hesitated for just a moment, then handed them over. Dean took his time reviewing them. The employment letter from Castellano's bakery, detailing Margaret's position, her reliability, her punctuality, the 3 paychecks, properly endorsed, totaling $127.50, her birth certificate, her social security card. Everything was in perfect order, organized with obvious care. "These papers are perfect," Dean said, looking up at Margaret. "You did a great job preparing them." "My mother helped me organize them," Margaret said, "but I filled out all the forms myself. I know what they all mean. I know what a savings account is. I know about interest and deposits and withdrawals. My mother explained everything." Dean nodded slowly. "I can see that. So tell me, what happened when you tried to open the account?" Margaret explained, her words tumbling out now. About Robert's dismissive tone, about Patricia's condescending smile, about being sent away from the manager, about sitting here for almost 20 minutes while other customers came and went, all of them being helped while she was ignored. "They're treating me like I'm a child," she said, her voice thick with suppressed tears. "Like I can't possibly understand something that everybody else understands. But I do understand. I just want them to give me a chance." Dean was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up, gently returning her documents to her. "Margaret," he said, and the fact that he'd remembered her name, she'd mentioned it while telling her story, made her look up at him with something like hope. "Would you do me a favor? Would you come with me to the counter and try this one more time?" "They'll just send me back here," Margaret said. "Not this time," Dean said. "This time, you'll have someone with you. Come on." He offered his hand, and Margaret took it, letting him help her to her feet. Together, they walked to the counter where Robert was now free, having just finished with his previous customer. Robert looked up, and his eyes widened slightly, seeing Dean Martin approaching his window. His entire demeanor changed, his back straightening, a professional smile appearing. "Mr. Martin, it's an honor, sir. How can I help you today?" "Actually," Dean said calmly, "you can help my friend Margaret here. She's trying to open a savings account, and I understand there's been some confusion about her paperwork." Robert's smile faltered. He glanced at Margaret, then back at Dean, clearly uncertain how to proceed. "Well, Mr. Martin, it's not exactly confusion about the paperwork. It's more a matter of ensuring that." "That what?" Dean asked, his voice still pleasant but with an unmistakable edge. "That she meets the requirements? Because I reviewed her documents, and they're all in order. Birth certificate, social security card, employment verification, and initial deposit. That's what you need to open a savings account, isn't it?" "Yes, sir, but..." "But what?" Dean's voice remained calm, but everyone within earshot had gone quiet. The entire bank seemed to be holding its breath. Robert looked desperately toward the manager's office, where Mr. Whitmore had finally emerged and was now approaching, having noticed the commotion. Gerald Whitmore was 56 years old, the bank manager for 12 years, a man who prided himself on running a respectable institution. He approached with his professional smile firmly in place. "Mr. Martin, I'm Gerald Whitmore, the manager here. I understand there's some concern about." "There's concern, all right," Dean said, turning to face Whitmore. "I'm concerned that you've kept this young woman waiting for 20 minutes. I'm concerned that your staff seems to think she's not capable of opening a savings account despite having all the required documentation. And I'm concerned that the only reason anyone's questioning her capability is because she has Down syndrome." The words hung in the air. Whitmore's smile froze. Several customers stopped what they were doing to stare. This was 1953, and people simply didn't talk about such things openly, certainly not in elegant Manhattan banks. "Mr. Martin," Whitmore said carefully, "I assure you, this institution doesn't discriminate. However, we do have a responsibility to ensure that account holders understand the legal and financial implications." "Stop," Dean interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut. "Just stop. I've heard that speech already, and it's garbage. You want to talk about understanding legal and financial implications? Let's talk about that." He gestured to Margaret. "This woman works at a bakery. She handles a cash register. She manages money every single day. Her employer," he held up the employment letter, "says she's reliable, punctual, and hasn't made a single error in 3 months. She understands money well enough to earn it, well enough to save it, and well enough to bring all the correct documentation to open an account. So explain to me, Mr. Whitmore, what exactly is it that she doesn't understand?" Part 3. When dignity drew its line. Whitmore opened his mouth, then closed it again. He was acutely aware that everyone in the bank was watching this exchange. Dean Martin, one of the most famous entertainers in America, was publicly challenging him in his own bank. This could go very wrong very quickly. "Mr. Martin." Whitmore tried again, his voice lower now, attempting privacy in a very public space. "Perhaps we could discuss this in my office." "No," Dean said flatly. "We're going to discuss it right here, right now, in front of all these people. Because Margaret here was humiliated in front of all these people. She was made to feel less than, treated like she wasn't capable, dismissed, and patronized in front of a room full of strangers. So if we're going to resolve this, we're going to do it the same way, publicly." Margaret stood next to Dean, her documents still clutched in her hands, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else, something that looked like the beginning of hope. Dean turned to address not just Whitmore, but the entire bank. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried with that same effortless projection that filled concert halls. "I want everyone here to understand something. This woman, Margaret Sullivan, is a working American citizen. She earns her money honestly. She pays her taxes. She saves her earnings. And she has every right to walk into this bank and open a savings account, just like any other customer." He paused, letting that sink in. "The fact that she has Down syndrome doesn't make her less capable of understanding money. The fact that she has Down syndrome doesn't make her less deserving of financial independence. The fact that she has Down syndrome doesn't give anyone in this bank the right to treat her like a child or question her competence when all the evidence," he held up her papers again, "shows that she's more than competent." Whitmore's face had gone red. He was trapped and he knew it. "Mr. Martin, I understand your point, but..." "Do you?" Dean asked. "Because I'm not sure you do. Let me make it clearer. I want you to process Margaret's account application right now. I want you to treat her with the same courtesy and respect you'd show any customer. And I want you to apologize for the way she's been treated here today." The silence in the bank was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on that marble floor. "And if I don't?" Whitmore asked quietly, a last attempt to salvage some authority. Dean smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then I walk out of here and I make a phone call. I call every newspaper in New York. I call every radio station. I call every columnist I know, and I know a lot of them. And I tell them the story of how the First National Bank of Manhattan refused to serve a hard-working young woman with Down syndrome, how they humiliated her, how they questioned her competence despite clear evidence of her ability, how they treated her like she was less than human. He paused. Now, I'm just an entertainer, but I've got a pretty big platform, and I'm willing to bet that's a story that would get a lot of attention. The kind of attention that might make other people with disabilities think twice about banking here. The kind of attention that might make a lot of your regular customers think twice about what kind of institution this really is. Dean's voice softened slightly, but lost none of its steel. Or, Mr. Whitmore, you could do the right thing. You could apologize to Margaret. You could process her application. You could treat her with the dignity she deserves. And we could all walk away from this knowing that today, this bank stood on the right side of decency. Whitmore looked at Margaret, really looked at her for the first time. He saw the tears she was trying so hard to hold back. He saw the carefully pressed dress, the organized documents, the pride that had been nearly crushed but was now, in Dean's presence, tentatively rebuilding. He saw a young woman who just wanted the same thing everyone else wanted, to be treated with respect. The calculation was visible on his face. He could fight this, defend his position, stand on protocol and policy. But he'd lose, not just his battle, but potentially much more. Dean Martin wasn't bluffing, and the story would indeed be devastating. Or he could do what Dean was asking. He could do the right thing. Miss Sullivan, Whitmore said finally, and this time his voice was different. Not patronizing, not dismissive, but genuine. I apologize. You're absolutely right. You have all the required documentation, and there's no reason we shouldn't process your application immediately. Robert, he turned to the teller, please help Miss Sullivan open her savings account. Robert looked stunned, but he nodded. Yes, sir. Of course. Miss Sullivan, if you'd like to step to the counter? Margaret looked up at Dean, her eyes asking if this was real, if it was safe to hope. Dean nodded. Go ahead. You've got this. Margaret approached the counter, and this time, Robert's demeanor was completely different. He took her documents respectfully, examined them carefully, and began filling out the necessary forms. He explained each step, but without condescension, with genuine professionalism. Your initial deposit will be $127.50, Robert said, and you'll earn 3% interest annually. You can make deposits or withdrawals at any time during banking hours. We'll issue you a passbook that will record all your transactions. Do you have any questions? No, Margaret said, her voice stronger now. I understand. Excellent. I just need your signature here, here, and here. Margaret signed carefully, her handwriting neat and practiced. Robert processed the paperwork, created her account, and handed her a brand new passbook with her name printed on the front. Margaret Sullivan. Margaret stared at it. Her first bank account, her name in official print, proof of her financial independence. The tears came then, but they were different tears. Tears of triumph, of vindication, of dignity restored. Thank you, she whispered. Robert nodded. Thank you for your business, Miss Sullivan. We're pleased to have you as a customer. Part 4. The Aftermath of Courage. Dean had stepped back during the transaction, giving Margaret a moment, but he watched, making sure everything was done correctly, making sure she was treated with respect. When Margaret turned from the counter, clutching her new passbook, her face transformed. The humiliation an hour ago had been replaced with pride, with joy, with the knowledge that she had won something important today. She walked over to Dean, and without thinking, without worrying about propriety or celebrity or any of that, she hugged him. Dean hugged her back, gently, the way you'd hug someone you cared about. Thank you, Margaret said into his shoulder. Thank you so much. You don't need to thank me, Dean said. You did this. You came here prepared. You knew what you needed. You stood your ground. I just helped them see what they should have seen from the beginning. Margaret pulled back, wiping her eyes. But they wouldn't have seen it without you. They didn't see it when it was just me. Dean's jaw tightened slightly. I know, and that's what needs a change. He turned to Whitmore, who was still standing nearby, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Whitmore, I want you to understand something. What happened here today, it can't happen again. Not to Margaret. Not at anyone with disabilities. Not at anyone who's different in any way. Because the next time someone like Margaret walks in here, I might not be here to speak up. And people shouldn't need a celebrity to defend them in order to be treated with basic human dignity. Whitmore nodded stiffly. I understand, Mr. Martin. I'll be speaking with my staff about our policies and procedures. This won't happen again. See that it doesn't, Dean said. Then, surprisingly, his voice softened. Look, I get it. We're all products of our time. We all have blind spots, prejudices we don't even realize we have. But when someone points them out, when someone shows you a better way, you've got to be willing to listen, to change. That's how we get better. He glanced around the bank at all the customers who had witnessed this. That goes for all of us. Every single person here saw what happened today. You saw someone being treated unfairly because of their disability. And you know what most of you did? Nothing. You watched. You whispered, but you didn't step up. The words weren't accusatory. Exactly. More sad. Disappointed. I'm not judging you for that, Dean continued. Most of the time, I probably wouldn't have stepped up either. It's easier not to get involved, not to make a scene. But every once in a while, you see something that's just wrong, and you've got to decide who you want to be, the kind of person who watches or the kind of person who acts. He put his hand on Margaret's shoulder. Today I decided to act. And because I did, Margaret here got her bank account, got treated with the respect she deserved. But what about next time? What about when I'm not here? What about all the other Margarets out there who are just trying to live their lives, try to achieve their independence, and running into walls of prejudice and condescension? Dean looked directly at several of the customers. Next time, will you step up? Will you speak out? Will you defend someone who's being treated unfairly? Or will you just watch? The silence was heavy, thoughtful. People were actually considering his words, examining their own consciences. Then an older woman near the back spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. You're right, Mr. Martin. I watched what was happening to that young lady, and I thought it was wrong, but I didn't say anything. I should have. I'm sorry, dear, she said to Margaret. You deserve better from all of us. Margaret nodded, accepting the apology with grace. Another customer, a businessman in an expensive suit, cleared his throat. I was thinking the same thing. It was uncomfortable to watch, but I told myself it wasn't my business. But that's how bad things happen, isn't it? When good people decide it's not their business. Dean nodded. Exactly. Evil doesn't just happen because bad people do bad things. It happens because good people stand by and let it happen. He turned back to Whitmore. I'm going to hold you to your word, Mr. Whitmore. I'm going to check in. And if I hear that anyone is treated the way Margaret was treated today, we're going to have another conversation, a more public one. You have my word, Mr. Martin, Whitmore said, and this time he sounded sincere. We'll do better. Dean finally turned to handle his own banking, but the mood in the bank had completely changed. What had been a place of quiet humiliation had become something else, a place where a lesson had been learned, where people had been challenged to be better. While Dean was at the counter with James, handling his own transaction, Margaret stood to the side, clutching her passbook, still somewhat in shock at everything that had transpired. An elderly man approached her, hat in hand. Miss, I just wanted to say congratulations on your new account. And I'm sorry I didn't speak up earlier. You deserve better. Margaret smiled at him. Thank you. That means a lot. A young mother with a child came next. My sister has Down syndrome, she said quietly. She's only 8, but when she grows up, I hope people treat her the way you deserve to be treated today, with respect. Thank you for being so brave. Margaret felt something shift inside her. She hadn't thought of herself as brave. She'd just been trying to do something normal, something ordinary. But maybe that was bravery, doing ordinary things in a world that didn't always want to let you. When Dean finished his transaction, he walked back over to Margaret. Ready to head out? They walked toward the door together, but as they reached it, Dean paused. He turned back to face the bank one more time. One last thing, he said, his voice carrying across the marble hall. I want everyone to remember this day. Remember Margaret Sullivan. Remember that she's just as capable, just as deserving, just as human as any of us. And the next time you see someone being treated poorly because they're different, remember that you have a choice. You can watch or you can act. Choose wisely. With that, Dean and Margaret walked out into the bright October sunshine. Part 5, Ripples in Time. Outside the bank, Margaret stopped on the sidewalk, looking down at her passbook, then up at Dean. "I don't know how to thank you properly," she said. "You already did," Dean replied. "But if you want to really thank me, do me a favor. Don't let today be the end of this. Don't let this be the last time you stand up for yourself. You prove something in there, not just to them, but to yourself. You're capable. You're strong. Don't forget that." Margaret nodded, tears in her eyes again. "I won't forget, ever." Dean smiled. "Good. Now, I've got a recording session to get to, and you've got a victory to celebrate. How about you head home and show your mother that passbook? I bet she'll be pretty proud." "She will be," Margaret said, smiling through her tears. Then, impulsively, she hugged Dean one more time. "You're a good man, Mr. Martin." "Dean," he corrected gently. "My friends call me Dean." "Dean," Margaret repeated, testing out the informality. "Thank you, Dean." They parted ways then, Margaret heading toward her apartment 6 blocks away, Dean hailing a cab to take him to the recording studio. But the impact of what had happened that morning would ripple far beyond that single interaction. Margaret arrived home at 11:30 a.m. to find her mother waiting anxiously. Dorothy had been watching the clock, worried about how long her daughter had been gone, hoping everything had gone well, but fearing the worst. "Mama," Margaret burst through the door, her face radiant. "Mama, look." She held up the passbook, and Dorothy took it with trembling hands, reading her daughter's name printed officially on the cover. "Oh, sweetheart," Dorothy whispered. "You did it. You actually did it." "I did it," Margaret confirmed. "Well, I had help. Dean Martin was there." Dorothy looked up confused. "Dean Martin? The singer?" And Margaret told her the whole story. About being dismissed and humiliated, about sitting on that bench trying not to cry, about Dean appearing and reviewing her documents, about him confronting the manager, about the speech he'd given to the entire bank. "He called me his friend, Mama," Margaret said, wonder in her voice. "In front of everyone. He said I was capable and strong and deserving. And he made them see it too." Dorothy pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, crying herself now. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. So proud. You went in there alone. And even when they tried to make you feel small, you didn't give up. You stood your ground." "I almost gave up," Margaret admitted. "But then Dean was there, and he helped me remember that I had every right to be there." That evening, Margaret called Mr. Castellano to tell him about opening her account. He congratulated her warmly, and then he did something unexpected. He gave her a raise. "You've been doing excellent work," he said, "and I think it's time that was reflected in your pay. Starting Monday, you'll be working 4 days a week instead of 3, and your hourly wage is going up by 15 cents. Margaret was stunned. "Really? Mr. Castellano, thank you." "You earned it, Margaret, and I hear you had quite an adventure at the bank today." Margaret paused. "How did you hear about that?" Mr. Castellano chuckled. "My wife was at that bank this morning. She saw the whole thing. She came home talking about how Dean Martin himself stood up for you. Said it was one of the most decent things she'd ever seen. Made her cry." He paused. "But more than that, Margaret, she said you held yourself with such dignity. Even when they were treating you poorly, you didn't yell or make a scene. You just quietly insisted on being treated fairly. That takes strength." After hanging up, Margaret sat with her mother in their small living room, the passbook on the coffee table between them, and they talked about the future, about saving for a vacation, about Margaret maybe eventually getting her own small apartment, about all the possibilities that came with financial independence. "Today changed something," Dorothy said thoughtfully. "Not just for you, but maybe for other people too. What Dean Martin did, standing up like that, publicly. People will remember that. People will talk about it." She was right. The story spread through New York service industry like wildfire. Waitresses told waiters. Bank tellers told cashiers. Shop workers told office workers. Within a week, nearly everyone in Manhattan had heard some version of the story about Dean Martin defending a woman with Down syndrome at a bank. The details got embellished in the retelling, as stories do. Some versions had Dean threatening to buy the bank and fire everyone. Others had him giving an hour-long speech about civil rights. But the core remained the same. A powerful man had used his influence to defend someone powerless, to insist on dignity and respect for someone society routinely dismissed. And while the story spread, something else happened. Other people started speaking up. A waitress challenged a customer who was being rude to her co-worker with cerebral palsy. A shop owner refused service to a patron who mocked another customer with a speech impediment. Small act of courage, inspired by one larger one. At the First National Bank of Manhattan, Whitmore was true to his word. He held a mandatory meeting with all staff about treating customers with disabilities. He created new policies, ensuring that anyone with proper documentation would be served without questions about their capacity. He even hired a consultant to train staff on respectful interaction with people who had various disabilities. Robert, the teller who had initially dismissed Margaret, struggled with what had happened. He went home that evening and talked to his wife about it, admitting his shame. "I thought I was protecting the bank," he said. Protecting her. I thought she didn't understand what she was doing. But the truth is, I didn't understand. I didn't understand that having Down syndrome doesn't mean you can't manage money. Doesn't mean you can't have dreams and goals. Doesn't mean you're not capable. His wife listened and said, "What are you going to do about it?" The next week, Robert volunteered to help teach financial literacy classes at a community center that served adults with intellectual disabilities. It was his way of making amends, of learning to see people the way Dean had seen Margaret, as capable, worthy, deserving of respect. Part 6. What Brotherhood Really Means. 2 weeks after the incident, Dean received a letter at his management office. It was from Dorothy Sullivan, Margaret's mother. "Dear Mr. Martin, I hope this letter finds you well. I am writing to thank you for what you did for my daughter Margaret at the First National Bank. I know she thanked you herself, but I felt I needed to add my gratitude as well. You need to understand something about Margaret's life. From the moment she was born, doctors told me she would never be able to do the things other children do. They said she would never read, never write, never hold a job, never live independently. They suggested I institutionalize her. But I looked at my daughter and I saw possibilities. I saw potential. So I taught her to read. I taught her to write. I taught her to count and manage money. I fought to get her into regular schools. I worked with her every single day, building her skills, building her confidence. And it worked. Margaret learned everything they said she couldn't learn. She got jobs. She proved herself capable. But even with all that capability, the world still treats her as less than. People still see her disability before they see her humanity. Until you saw Margaret, not her Down syndrome, but you saw her capability, her dignity, her worth, and you insisted that others see it too. What you did that day gave Margaret something more valuable than a bank account. You gave her the belief that she deserves respect, that she doesn't have to accept being diminished, that she has allies in this world. I don't know if you understand how rare that is, how precious. Most people are kind to Margaret in a condescending way. They pat her head and speak to her like a child. But you treated her as an equal. You defended her the way you defend anyone you respected. Thank you. Thank you for being the kind of man who stands up. Thank you for teaching my daughter that she's worthy of being defended. And thank you for reminding the world that people with disabilities are people first. You changed my daughter's life that day. I hope you know that. With deepest gratitude, Dorothy Sullivan. Dean read the letter in his dressing room before a show in Chicago. His manager found him sitting quietly, the letter in his hands, tears in his eyes. "You okay, Dean?" Dean nodded, carefully folding the letter. "Yeah, just reminded of something important." "What's that?" "That the smallest act of kindness can mean everything. That standing up for someone doesn't just change their day, It can change their life. He kept that letter for the rest of his life, in a special box with other meaningful correspondence. And whenever he was asked about it later, whenever the story of defending Margaret came up, he always said the same thing. I didn't do anything special. I just did what anyone should do. Treated a person with dignity and refused to let others treat them poorly. That's not heroic. That's just basic decency. The real hero was Margaret, for having the courage to keep trying, to keep believing in herself even when the world told her not to. But Dean was wrong about one thing. What he did was special. Because in a world where most people choose comfort over courage, where most people look away from injustice rather than confront it, choosing to act is always special. Dean could have handled his banking and left. He could have felt bad for Margaret, but decided it wasn't his business. He could have privately complained to the manager later. He could have done any number of things that would have been easier, more comfortable, less confrontational. But he chose to act. He chose to stand next to someone who needed an ally. He chose to use his privilege and platform to demand justice for someone who had neither. And in doing so, he showed everyone watching what true character looks like. It's not about being famous or powerful. It's about what you do with that fame and power when you see injustice. It's about choosing to speak up when silence would be easier. It's about insisting on human dignity, even when it costs you something. Part 7. The Legacy of a Single Morning. Years later, in 1967, Margaret was invited to speak at a conference for families of people with intellectual disabilities. She was 37 years old by then, still working at the bakery, now as assistant manager, still maintaining her savings account, which had grown considerably, and living in her own apartment. She told the story of that morning at the bank, and when she finished, she said something that brought the entire audience to tears. What Dean Martin did for me that day taught me something crucial. He taught me that my disability doesn't define my worth. He taught me that I have the right to expect respect, not just hope for it. He taught me that there are people in this world who will stand up for justice, even when it's uncomfortable. She paused, looking out at the audience of parents, siblings, and people with disabilities. But more importantly, he taught me that I could stand up for myself. Because after that day, I never again let anyone treat me as less than. If someone was condescending, I called them on it. If someone questioned my ability, I proved it. If someone tried to limit me, I showed them they were wrong. Dean Martin gave me my dignity that day. But what I learned was that dignity isn't something someone can give you or take away. It's something you claim, something you insist on. Dean helped me remember that. He helped me claim my own worth. The story of that October morning became part of disability rights folklore. It was told and retold, an example of allyship done right, of using privilege to amplify the marginalized, of insisting on human dignity when society was content to deny it. But for Margaret, it was always deeply personal. It was the day she learned she was worth defending, the day she learned that her dreams mattered, the day she learned that she didn't have to accept diminishment. She never met Dean Martin again after that morning, but she thought of him often, especially when she faced challenges, when she needed courage. She would remember the way he calmly reviewed her documents, the way he'd stood next to her at the counter, the way he'd insisted that the bank treat her with respect. And she'd think, if Dean Martin believed I was worth defending, then I must be worth defending. If he saw capability in me, then I am capable. If he insisted on my dignity, then I am dignified. That was the real gift he gave her. Not just help in that moment, but a foundation for every moment afterward. In 1995, at age 65, Margaret attended Dean Martin's funeral. She traveled from New York to Los Angeles specifically for this purpose. She didn't expect to be noticed. She was just one mourner among thousands. But she needed to be there, needed to pay her respects to the man who had changed her life 42 years earlier. At the reception afterward, she approached Dean's daughter, Deanna Martin, and introduced herself. "I don't expect you to know who I am," Margaret said, "but your father did something for me once that I've never forgotten." And she told the story one more time, about being 23 and trying to open a bank account, about being humiliated and dismissed, about Dean stepping in, reviewing her papers, demanding respect. Deanna listened, tears streaming down her face. "That sounds exactly like something Dad would do," she said. He couldn't stand seeing people treated unfairly. It made him furious, but he always handled it with such grace. Margaret nodded. "He saved my life that day. Not literally, but in every way that matters. He helped me believe in myself." Deanna hugged her. "Thank you for telling me this. Thank you for being here. Dad would have been so glad to know that moment meant so much to you." "It meant everything," Margaret said simply. Epilogue. What one morning taught you us all. The story of Dean Martin and Margaret Sullivan at the First National Bank of Manhattan on October 15th, 1953, teaches us several crucial lessons. First, it teaches us about the power of standing witness. Dean could have looked away, could have decided this wasn't his problem, could have handled his banking and left. But he chose to pay attention, to notice someone in distress, to care about a stranger's humiliation. How often do we look away? How often do we see injustice and decide it's not our business? How often do we prioritize our comfort over someone else's dignity? Dean reminds us that being a good person means paying attention, means noticing when others are suffering, means choosing to see what would be easier to ignore. Second, it teaches us about the proper use of privilege and power. Dean had fame. He had influence. He could have used it for many things. He chose to use it to defend someone who had neither fame nor influence, someone who was being dismissed precisely because she lacked power. That's what privilege is for, not to elevate yourself, but to elevate others, not to dominate, but to advocate, not to benefit personally, but to create justice for those who can't create for themselves. Dean understood that a celebrity gave him a platform, and he used that platform to insist on basic human decency. He weaponized his fame in the service of dignity. Third, it teaches us about the nature of respect. The bank staff claimed they were acting out of concern for Margaret, out of a desire to protect her from financial decisions she might not understand. But their protection was really condescension. Their concern was really prejudice. Real respect means treating people as capable unless proven otherwise. It means giving people the opportunity to try, to succeed, to sometimes fail. It means not making assumptions based on disability, race, gender, or any other characteristic. Dean saw what the bank staff missed, that Margaret had done everything right. She prepared. She brought proper documentation. She demonstrated her capability. The only thing standing between her and her bank account was their prejudice. Fourth, it teaches us that change happens when good people refuse to tolerate injustice. The bank didn't change its policies because of internal reflection. It changed because Dean made it uncomfortable not to change, because he threatened to make their prejudice public and costly. Sometimes being kind isn't enough. Sometimes you have to be willing to be confrontational, to make people uncomfortable, to create consequences for bad behavior. Dean understood this. He was calm, but he was also firm. He was polite, but he was also unyielding. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the story teaches us about the lasting impact of single moments. Dean spent maybe 20 minutes defending Margaret, 20 minutes out of his entire life. But those 20 minutes changed Margaret's trajectory permanently. They gave her confidence. They gave her self-worth. They gave her the belief that she was entitled to dignity. And those gifts stayed with her for the rest of her life, influencing every challenge she faced, every goal she pursued, every time she needed courage. We never know when our actions might have that kind of impact. We never know when a small act of kindness or courage might change someone's entire life, which means we should act as if every moment matters. Because it might. Dean Martin walked into a bank on an October morning in 1953 for a routine transaction. He walked out having taught an entire institution about dignity, having given a young woman the gift of self-worth, having demonstrated to everyone watching what it means to stand up for what's right. He didn't plan any of that. He just saw someone being treated poorly and decided it wasn't okay. And that decision, that simple, clear moral choice, echoed through decades. That's the power of choosing to act. That's the power of insisting on human dignity. That's the power of standing next to someone who needs an ally and saying, "You will respect my friend or you will answer to me." August 12, 1962, Dean Martin stood up for Sammy Davis Jr. against a mobster's racism. October 15, 1953, he stood up for Margaret Sullivan against a bank's ableism. Different days, different people, different specific injustices. But the same core truth. Dean Martin understood that brotherhood means defending people's dignity. That family means standing together against prejudice. That love means risking something of yourself to protect someone else's humanity. That's a legacy worth remembering. That's a lesson worth learning. That's a performance worth celebrating. Not the songs or the movies or the fame, but the moments when one man looked at injustice and said, "No, not while I'm here, not while I'm watching, not while I have a voice to speak and the courage to use it." That's what made Dean Martin special. Not his talent, though he had plenty. Not his fame, though he had that too. But his willingness to use both in service of something larger than himself. Human dignity. And that's what makes his story, and Margaret's story, worth telling and retelling. Because we all face moments when we can choose to act or choose to look away. When we can stand up or stay silent. When we can defend dignity or accept injustice. Dean Martin showed us what the right choice looks like. Margaret Sullivan showed us why it matters. The question now is, what will we do with that lesson? When we see someone being treated poorly because they're different, will we look away or will we speak up? When we witness injustice, will we decide it's not our problem or will we make it our responsibility? When someone needs an ally, will we choose comfort or will we choose courage? Dean Martin made his choice in that Manhattan bank on an October morning 70 years ago. And in doing so, he changed a life, challenged a system, and showed us all what brotherhood really means. The question is, what choice will we make when our moment comes?